Nindo, literally meaning ninja way, is a personal rule that each shinobi lives by. It is their way of life, their motto, belief, or dream. A ninja's Nindo can be anything, no matter how immoral their personal point of view is. So I ask you, what is your Nindo? Your ninja way? I feel that was the perfect intro before we segue into the build, one that I would like to introduce as the Shard Eater Shinobi. The name will make sense shortly, and the goal of this build is quite simple. Turn our hunter into an orb generating Shuriken-Slinging-Savage. Try saying that 5 times fast with stompies on. In this video, and perhaps in future videos, I'm going to break down this build into multiple parts. The first being what is essential to get the build engine running. I like to call this build the core. Once the core is established, I'll demonstrate and provide a few examples or variants to give you a good idea of what this build is capable of, and hopefully inspire you to create your own version or variant. So, whether we wanted it or not, let's get into it. As I stated earlier, I'm going to break this video down into a few parts, the first of which is the core. The core of this build will only require 2 main mods, 3 if you count an optional mod that comes from the artifact. Those mods being elemental shards, which will convert the stasis shards we make into elemental stasis wells. To take advantage of those wells, we need elemental charge, thus allowing us to become charged with light times 2 by collecting the created shards. And the third core, which is completely optional, but I still recommend using, is the artifact mod Thermoclastic Blooming. This mod alone will generate an orb every time you land a final blow with your shurikens. And that's it. Those 3 mods are the main engine of this build that allows it to function. Quite simple, isn't it? From there, the rest of the mods are yours to customize as you will. For example, I'll showcase a support variant I love to use. Since the core only occupies 2 of the main 5 mod slots, this leaves you with 3 variable mods to use, or flex mods as I like to call them. In this case, we're using Font of Wisdom, which will max out our intellect upon collecting a shard, allowing us to spec our stats into other areas. Well of Potency, another artifact mod, which will grant us super energy for picking up every stasis elemental shard. And Striking Light, which states defeating combats with melee damage or sword while charged with light will spawn an orb of power for allies. And yes, it stacks with Thermoclastic Blooming, but only for your allies. So essentially, every single shuriken kill that you get will spawn 2 orbs for your allies. This variant is all about being an orb generator for your allies, littering the battlefield with stasis and orbs of power. The stasis aspects we are using are Grim Harvest, which is also essential, which will make the stasis shards when defeating slowed or frozen combatants, and Touch of Winter, which is optional. However, I feel as though it is the best choice as it elevates our fragment options from 4 to 5. Speaking of fragments, you can choose whichever ones you like. However, I equip the following: Durance, for a bonus +10 in strength. Bonds, granting us super energy from defeating frozen foes. Whisper of Hunger, increasing the melee energy gained from stasis shards. Whisper of Fractures, kickstarting our melee regen when surrounded by 2 targets. And Rhyme, further taking advantage of stasis shards, granting us health, overshield, and increasing our survivability. You can pick and choose whichever ones you like. These merely complement my playstyle as a support player. And so for the general loop, it is as follows. Land a final blow with your shuriken, thus spawning an orb and stasis shard. Collect that shard to become charged with light times 2. And then you can utilize that charge by whatever you have equipped. In this instance, Striking Light will consume a charge, thus spawning 2 orbs for my allies. Profit, rinse, and repeat. It goes without saying that you would probably want to spec as much as you could into melee energy, allowing the loop to be maintained easier, which is why I choose the fragments that I have showcased. It is of the high risk, high reward mentality. If you've made it this far, Guardian, and have a keen eye for detail, you may have noticed that I haven't mentioned any exotics or weapons. Much like other areas of this build, it can be customized to your liking. To create further synergy with this variant, I went with Star Eater scales for super obvious reasons. which has more value in this sandbox due to the way that intellect now functions. However, if super regen isn't your thing and you have multiple options, how about Assassin's Cowl for invisibility and survivability? What about 6 Coyotes so you have more utility? Running Aeons? Why not make Orbs and Heavy? I think that's why I really enjoy using this build so much, because depending on the activity, you can tailor make it to your playstyle, and it has a great level of viability. Speaking of exotics, allow me to showcase a DPS themed variant with one of the least used exotics. Oh Shinobi mine, the sealed Ahamkara's Grass. The initial core is the same, Elemental Shards and Elemental Charge. The 3 flex mods I chose for this example are as follows: High Energy Fire for the 20% boost in damage, Elemental Time Dilation to give us more breathing room for our final flex mod, which is Font of Might, which adds a 25% weapon damage to weapons matching our Stasis subclass. Obviously, you would want to equip a Stasis weapon, of which there are a decent amount of options. You have Peace Bar, which I'm using with Swashbuckler, and the new Zephyr Stasis Sword, which will also make Stasis Shards. Shout out to Asticos. Pair that with Divinity, and you will help with the boss DPS. The core execution is the same, just the overall function is tailored for increased weapon damage and skipping some of the reloading process. During something like DPS, think Atheon, Tenix, or the new dungeon, this variant does wonders. With sealed Ahamkara's Grass, you can keep your magazine topped off with a toss of a Shuriken. Better yet, you have a different exotic that suits your playstyle that you wish to utilize but still wish to reload. Replace one of your stasis fragments with Whisper of Impetus, essentially allowing you to reload your weapon instead. There are also a plethora of weapons to choose from that may synergize and take this build's potential even higher. You have any weapon with Swashbuckler or the new BXR perk. If you're using the Font of Might variant, you have Aegis Scepter, Cryosthesia, Ice Luna, Vulpecula, Fractured Thigh, or you could use Fate Bringer or the Judgment with Osmosis. You also have things like Monte Carlo and Reed's Regret. You also could use something that benefits from collecting orbs, such as Wave Splitter and Ascendancy. Take your pick, Guardian. Get creative. The only limits are the ones you set on yourself. Speaking of yourself, it only gets better with other players. Needless to say, it can benefit and piggyback off of the Titan Heisenberg build, which I will put a link in the description, due to the amount of shards that he can generate. Or perhaps you have a full squad of Shinobis, like Team 7, Shuriken-Slinging non-stop. The beautiful thing is, this build can be used with great success in most, if not all, GMs and strikes. It works phenomenally in strikes with a massive concentration of adds clumped together, because the Shuriken will bounce from target to target. Think both for the layers, the Hollowed and the Devils. You couple this with a few more mods and you could even stun the Overloads if they become a bother. Don't forget and don't neglect things like hands-on and invigoration as well, which will further increase the efficacy of this build. There are many more routes you can take. For instance, if you don't like using stasis, you could use solar melees and produce the same effect. But that's the beauty of this build. There are many paths, and the path is yours to take. So, grab your hunter and show me your Nindo, Guardian. If you like the vibe, subscribe. And if you enjoyed what you see, triple tap that like button. Until the next build, embrace your Nindo, Guardian.